On a previous episode, we discussed how the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Trump's favor in an immigration case, a case that involved the deportation of illegal aliens present here in the U.S. However, that earlier case that we discussed, it was won by Trump on a technicality. Basically, the lawyers of the illegal immigrant, they decided to file their case in Washington, D.C., rather than in Texas, where the man was being held, and therefore the case was dismissed because it was brought forth in the incorrect venue. But very notably, in that earlier case, the underlying legal issues at play were not actually examined. The question of whether the Alien Enemies Act could really be used against Venezuelan gang members, it was not really ruled on. However, that all changed late Saturday night. That was when, at 12:55 a.m., basically 1 in the morning, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an unsigned order, you can see it up on your screen, blocking the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members, at least for the time being. Let's go through the details of the order together, how it came to be, what it means in the short term in regards to Trump's deportation plan, as well as what it might mean in the long term. And before I forget, I will mention that the Epoch Times is having an Easter sale. Well, they had it and they extended it for a few extra days. And so if you've been on the fence about trying the Epoch Times, you want to subscribe, you're looking for a source of solid news that doesn't spin narratives or present only one side of the facts and not the other, you're looking for a really robust source of information, especially during the second Trump administration when a lot of legacy news outlets have sort of, let's say, gone off the rails. Well, try the Epoch Times. It's only $1 a week. And again, now's a great time because the Easter sale makes it $1 a week, and that'll be over soon. So if you want to try it, I'll throw the link. It'll be right there in the description box below. Just click over there. It'll take you to a landing page. You just put in your details, and you can try the Epoch Times for yourself. I'm sure you'll love it. Now, getting back to the Supreme Court decision, let's start with a bit of background on this particular case. Soon after assuming office, President Trump signed into effect something known as Proclamation 10903. You can see it up on your screen. That proclamation officially declared that the U.S. government officially designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, up until then, Tren de Aragua was known to just be a Venezuelan gang, made famous when members of that gang were caught on camera harassing people who were living in an apartment complex over in Aurora, Colorado. But on March 20th of this year, that all changed. Here's specifically what Trump's proclamation said regarding this gang. Quote, Tren de Aragua is a designated foreign terrorist organization with thousands of members, many of whom have unlawfully infiltrated the United States and are conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the United States. Tren de Aragua operates in conjunction with Cartel de las Sales, the Nicolas Maduro regime-sponsored narco-terrorism enterprise based in Venezuela, and commits brutal crimes, including murders, kidnappings, extortions, and human, drug, and weapons trafficking. Tren de Aragua has engaged in and continues to engage in mass illegal migration to the United States to further its objectives of harming United States citizens, undermining public safety, and supporting the Maduro regime's goal of destabilizing democratic nations in the Americas, including the United States. Now, the language used in this proclamation was very particular, and it was tailor-made to tie the actions of this Venezuelan gang with the current Venezuelan president, Mr. Nicolas Maduro. This connection is important because by making it, the Trump administration allowed itself to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. Signed into law all the way back in the year 1798, this act allows the sitting president to deport anyone who is not an American citizen if they're from a country with which there is a declared war or an attempted invasion or predatory incursion. And so, by highlighting this connection between the Venezuelan government and Tren de Aragua, it makes what's happening arguably a form of state-sponsored predatory incursion, which is the prerequisite for the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, which is exactly what President Trump did, writing further down in this proclamation that, quote, I direct that all alien enemies described in Section 1 of this proclamation are subject to immediate apprehension, detention, and removal, and further, that they shall not be permitted residence in the United States. In practical terms, this meant that all members of this gang who are Venezuelan citizens, who are at least 14 years of age, and who are not also U.S. citizens or green card holders, they are now subject to immediate removal. and that's exactly what started happening. Using this pretext, the Trump administration began rounding up illegal aliens and sending them on flights, either back to Venezuela or, if that didn't work out, to that large detention center that was recently built over in El Salvador. However, not all of these alleged gang members are just letting themselves get kicked out of America. Some are choosing to actually fight their deportations in court. And along that line, last week, on Friday, April 18th, the ACLU filed an emergency request to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of two Venezuelans that they were representing legally. The two Venezuelans were both facing deportation, and so the ACLU, they asked the Supreme Court to immediately block the Trump administration from being able to deport their clients. You can see the emergency appeal up on your screen. This was the one that was filed with the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was called AARP and WMM versus Donald J. Trump. And just for your reference, AARP and WMM are the initials of the two Venezuelans who I would have to assume want to remain anonymous, given the fact that in the whole document, their name does not appear even once. Regardless, though, their main argument is that these Venezuelans are not being given due process. Many of the notices that they're receiving from the U.S. government are in English, while many of the detainees don't even speak English. They speak exclusively Spanish. And then also, they are questioning the legality of using the Alien Enemies Act at all in the way that it's being used. Here's part of what the ACLU wrote in their application, again, that was sent over to the Supreme Court. Quote, "To date, at least 137 Venezuelan men have been removed under the Proclamation and are now in El Salvador in one of the most notorious prisons in the world, possibly for the rest of their lives. Whether most or perhaps all of these previously removed individuals lack ties to Tren de Aragua remains to be seen, because the Trump administration secretly rushed the men out of the country and have provided no information about them. But evidence since these individuals were sent to El Salvador flights on March 15th increasingly shows that many were not, quote-unquote, members of Tren de Aragua. Such false accusations are particularly devastating given our clients' strong claims for relief under our immigration laws." Interestingly, the ACLU also used the example of that man who was wrongly deported back to El Salvador and who the Supreme Court said the U.S. government should facilitate his return, but the U.S. government said our hands are basically tied. The El Salvador government is not going to send him back. And they used that as an example for why this application should be granted, because if these people are deported to El Salvador and then it turns out they were, quote unquote, wrongly deported, they likely will not be sent back given that earlier example. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. Listen, it's obvious that the financial system is not looking too great. After being pumped up with trillions of virtually free government dollars for many, many years now, well, the stock bubble might actually burst in the near future. And in that process, unfortunately, it could take away the nest egg of anyone who happens to be exposed to it. And so consider taking this opportunity to diversify into something which is beyond the grasp of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, physical gold and silver. And the best company to use, in my opinion, is the sponsor of today's episode, American Hartford Gold, who I should mention is also my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. And besides myself, they have thousands of 5-star reviews from other Americans, and they also have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. And working with them is rather simple. They have a huge selection of coins, bars, and rounds to choose from. They have super friendly staff who you can call, and they can set up either gold delivery directly to your doorstep, or they can even set you up in a gold IRA. And then lastly, best of all, if you tell them the Roman sent you, they will throw in a free gold coin with your first qualifying purchase. So give them a call. The number is 866-242-2352. That's 866-242-2352. Or you can simply text Roman to 65532. I'll also throw a link to their webpage. It'll be down there in the description box below. And then the ACLU went on in their application to request the Supreme Court immediately halt deportation proceedings, not only for the two men listed in this lawsuit, but also anyone in the same class as them. Meaning, they were requesting that all alleged Tren de Aragua members have their deportations halted as well. Here is the specific request they were making. Quote, "Removal without sufficient notice and time to seek habeas relief is in clear violation of this court's decision of April 7, 2025 in Trump versus JGG. That was the earlier case we discussed in our previous episode. Applicants therefore respectfully request an immediate order from this court barring any removals of proposed class members. Without this court's intervention, dozens or hundreds of proposed class members may be removed to a possible life sentence in El Salvador with no real opportunity to contest their designation or removal. Emergency relief is necessary not only to preserve the status quo and prevent permanent and irreversible harm to applicants, but also to preserve the court's jurisdiction in light of the government's position that it need not return individuals, even those mistakenly removed. We ask only that this court preserve the status quo so that proposed class members will not be sent to a notorious prison in El Salvador before the American judicial system can afford them due process. And indeed, as I mentioned at the very top of the episode, in an unsigned order that was issued at roughly 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, the U.S. Supreme Court acquiesced and they granted the emergency appeal. The order, which you can see up on your screen, was very short. It was just a few sentences long, about half a page, and it simply said the following, quote, "The government is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court." Now, notably, while this order from the Supreme Court itself is unsigned, at the very bottom, it does mention that two justices dissented, Justices Clarence Thomas as well as Justice Sam Alito. And to that end, on the next day, which was Easter Sunday, Sam Alito published his own dissenting opinion. You can see it up on your screen. The dissent was joined by Clarence Thomas, and aside from saying that it was legally questionable whether the Supreme Court could actually block the administration from deporting these alleged Venezuelan gang members, it also questioned the odd timing of the order itself. Here's specifically what Sam Alito wrote in his dissenting opinion. Quote, "In sum, literally in the middle of the night, the court issued unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party, within 8 hours of receiving the application, with dubious factual support for its order, and without providing any explanation for its order. I refused to join the court's order because we had no good reason to think that, under the circumstances, issuing an order at midnight was necessary or appropriate." And then, aside from the timing of the order, Sam Alito went on to list some of the problems that he saw with the legal rationale as well. Here's what he wrote, quote, "It is not clear that the Supreme Court had jurisdiction. It is questionable whether the applicants complied with the general obligation to seek emergency injunctive relief in the district court before asking for such relief from an appellate court." Meaning that it appears that the ACLU essentially jumped steps to get to the Supreme Court ASAP. He continues, "When this court rushed to enter its order, the Court of Appeals was considering the issue of emergency relief, and we were informed that a decision would be forthcoming. This court, however, refused to wait. The only papers before this court were those submitted by the applicants. The court had not ordered or received a response by the government regarding either the applicants' factual allegations or any of the legal issues presented by the application. And the court did not have the benefit of a government response filed in any of the lower courts either. The papers before us, while alleging that the applicants were in imminent danger of removal, provided little concrete support for that allegation. And then lastly, although the court provided class-wide relief, the district court never certified a class, and this court has never held that class relief may be sought in a habeas proceeding." Now, obviously, some of the problems he highlighted here are a bit legally technical, but in plain English, in short, he was saying that between the midnight timing of the order and the scale of the relief granted, as well as the underlying situation that was playing itself out, Sam Alito said that this was an unprecedented move by the High Court, and perhaps it was an overreach. However, his position was in the minority, and therefore the deportations have been blocked. Now, moving forward, it's not exactly clear how this will all play out. It could be that the ACLU will have their day in court, and only once their case concludes will this ban on deportations either be lifted or made permanent. That part is not exactly clear. Again, the order from the U.S. Supreme Court, that very short half-page order that you can again see up on your screen, it simply said that the people who belong to the putative class of detainees shall not be deported by the government until further order from the U.S. Supreme Court. Meaning, to the best of anyone's guess, in a practical sense, all Tren de Aragua members are currently safe from deportation, at least until the U.S. Supreme Court decides otherwise. If you'd like to go through the details of this case in greater depth, I will throw the proclamation from Trump, the application from the ACLU, as well as both the Supreme Court order and Sam Alito's dissent. I'll throw the links to all those documents down into the description box below if you are the type of person that likes to dig into the weeds. And all I ask in return is that as you're making your way down there to that description box, take a super short detour to smash those like and subscribe buttons so that this content can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm. And also, obviously, this is an evolving case. This is an interim step. Obviously, this is not the final decision. In the near future, either deportations will once again be allowed or they won't be allowed. And so we'll know once a decision has been made one way or the other. I'll make a follow-up episode giving you that update. Until then, though, you can find those links down in the description box below. And I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.